Warning: tonight's video, although edited for YouTube, is an educational program talking about some of the most dangerous theme parks around the world. If you have phobias of heights, mascots, or large hypercoasters, then this video may not be for you. Clicking off the video now is the only way you can avoid being scared. Viewer discretion is advised.
Who doesn't love a good amusement park? The deep-fried delicacies that fill the air with their scent of diabetes and grease. The long lines of people all elbowing one another to be first and snarling at those who dare cut. The games are all rigged into Park's advantage, ensuring that you'll shell out a lot of cash for that made-in-Mexico bootleg Pikachu. However, what comes to mind most of all when it comes to these parks are, of course, the rides. There's nothing more thrilling than sitting on a roller coaster, rushing down a hill at 50 miles per hour, the wind smacking at you, pulling your hair back, making your eyes water. Fun! Well, that's until the ride slips off track, sending you and the rest of your patrons on a one-way trip to hell. Needless to say, that's not so fun. Today, we'll be memorializing the best of the worst theme parks that you should think twice about before deciding on a vacation spot for you and your family. Perhaps after this video, you'll think twice about the next vacation spot you decide. With that being said, sit back, relax, turn down the lights as we talk about the top 5 most dangerous amusement parks you won't believe actually existed. Kings Island, Ohio. Kings Island opened its doors on April 29th, 1972, though the park didn't truly open until May 27th, when most of the rides were open to the public. The park was mostly comprised of rides left over from Coney Island, which was purchased by the Taft Broadcasting Company in 1969 for the sum of over a staggering $6 million. And it quickly became a hit with the public. The coaster, the Racer, was the big star of the show as it was comprised almost entirely out of wood. The park was gaining popularity quicker than they thought was even possible, and things were starting to look up, until bad luck begun to strike. On May 26, one of the park's employees, Mr. Terry Riat, was mauled and killed by one of the park's lions on a wildlife exhibit, which of course featured real-life hungry animals. Some say that the lion was mistreated, thus leading to the poor creature to attack. Fortunately, Terry got out of the accident with only a punctured trachea, surviving his bout with the king of the jungle, though forever scarred. Less than a year later, another incident occurred, sadly taking the life of 17-year-old John Harder. Harder was brave, though perhaps he was too adventurous for his own good. On May 13th, 1983, he was climbing up an elevator shaft at the then restricted Eiffel Tower exhibit before falling to his demise. All happened, of course, on a Friday the 13th, no less. Still to this day, it is widely believed that Johnny resides within this tower. At least, he finally made it to the top. Things were going fine for Kings Island through the rest of the 80s. The park was growing in popularity for its record-breaking rides and its many TV appearances until June 9th, 1991.
Meanwhile, at Kings Island near Cincinnati, the investigation continues into 2 bizarre incidents that left 3 people dead.
2 freak accidents occurred all within one day, including the death of Cindy Taylor. Miss Taylor was getting strapped into the Space Commander ride that lifted one into the air before spinning all the riders around quickly as it rises farther and farther into the air. However, there was a problem with the straps in Cindy's seat, as they were not tight enough, and she was thrown from over 30 feet in the air before hitting the ground and dying. Reports say that she was drunk upon entering the Space Commander, making her body far more limp, thus making the already loose straps more of a concern. Earlier that same day, Timothy Benning entered the park looking for a hat that he lost. He entered a restricted area, believing that it perhaps was knocked off while on a roller coaster. He soon fell into a pool that, due to a mechanical error with the water pump, shocked him unconscious. Fearing that his friend may drown, his buddy Will jumped in after him, along with the help of his security guard, Daryl Robertson. Sadly, another electrical current passed through the water, shocking Will and Daryl to death. The area of the park was soon evacuated, and all the pools were cleared in fear that there may be more electrical errors. Paramedics soon showed up and pronounced Will and Daryl dead on scene. However, there is a bright side to this story. Tim survived and was soon taken to the hospital. This is known as King Island's darkest day. 2006 would be the most recent blip in unluckiness for Kings Island, when their famous ride known as Son of Beast proved to be the cause of an incident that led to 24 patrons being hospitalized. Son of Beast was actually a prequel ride to another ride simply known as The Beast, another wooden hypercoaster that broke many records in its time. Much like its dad, Son of Beast was another world record-breaking roller coaster made entirely out of wood. Built and designed by now defunct Roller Coaster Corporation of America, it opened to the public on May 26, 2000. And in addition to breaking the world record for speed, Son of Beast was the first wooden hypercoaster in the world with a 214 drop, and the second wooden roller coaster to feature a inversion, the first of which being Flip Flop Railway, but that was long defunct before the ride's opening. Roller Coaster Corporation of America was the company that started the Son of Beast, but from what I understand, they were fired partway through for using faulty wood in the construction, wood that was not built to withstand heat and cold cycles, which led to the wood cracking. Unfortunately, Kings Island, even though they knew about this, decided to continue with the construction anyway, including using the faulty wood.
Secrets concerning the Son of Beast. I mean, you hate to think it might have happened, but did Kings Island hide the truth about the roller coaster's safety?
Well, an engineer who inspected the ride says yes, and he's now telling his story tonight. News says John Lennon.
6 years into the roller coaster's lifespan, the wood was so cracked and creaking that it caused issues with the ride, and it would break down frequently. Some of the bolts on the ride holding it together could be pulled out with one's hand. No tools required. Despite this, the government agencies that actually make sure the roller coasters you ride are safe still approve this one. These cracks that, again, were inspected by government bodies kept growing and growing, and even started showing up in its foundation, making the ride weaker and weaker and making the ride overall less safe. Months before the accident, riders complained about feeling unsafe and not comfortable due to the ride's overly jerky nature compared to years previous. On the day in question, there was an extremely sharp jolt in the ride, causing the riders to shoot forward, damaging their necks and backs. Many victims sued, and it wound up in the courts until 2009. Son of Beast was closed in 2012 and replaced with another ride known as the Banshee. Kings Island is still up and running to this day and is one of the most profitable parks in the United States of America. By the way, you may be wondering why anyone would approve this ride for being safe for all ages. Well, let me tell you. The government body that investigates this is the Food and Drug Administration, who say, and I quote here, do not hire any roller coaster engineers. They are simply not qualified to be investigating these, which is what led to the downfall of the Son of Beast.
Battersea Fun Fair. Unlike the other entries on this list, this one is being built here for one single incident. However, it isn't just any incident, it is considered the worst roller coaster accident of all time, leaving many injured and multiple dead. Let us explain. Battersea Fun Fair opened in 1951, an expansion upon the already existing Battersea Park, being a moderate success at the time, but the real success was the Big Dipper. Standing at 49 feet tall and made entirely out of wood, people came from all over London just to see this beast in its complete stature. It was held together entirely by a rope lift that held all three carts as they went up and down the large ramps, holding around 24 riders per trip. The lines just to get on the damn thing wound up stretching far back, for over an hour at the time. Needless to say, it was the hot commodity at Battersea Park. This was until May 30th, 1972. All 3 cars filled up, arranged 2 across in 4 rows. Weeks beforehand, patrons had complained that the ride had felt rickety, and most of the time it just felt unsafe. Battersea, however, had done nothing, not even inspect the damn thing. Soon after the ride started, many of the patrons described being tossed about. Many bones were apparent, but there wasn't any casualties, up until noon, when the second car started to slowly make its way up the first hill, until the rope that was holding it tore in twain. The conductor of the car tried his hardest using the emergency brake, but unfortunately, the ride was coming down too fast, and at such a force that the brake broke. The car slammed back first into the one behind it, splintering the coaster into hundreds of little pieces, stabbing into some patrons. The first car was stuck on top of the hill, in danger of tipping over the edge. One of the patrons who was stuck on top leaned too closely on the side, and it broke in half. She fell to her death, much to the horror of all the witnesses. Down below, some of the kids died upon impact with the other carts. Others bled to death from the shrapnel. In total, 5 people were killed, 13 others gravely injured. The ones who weren't were traumatized for life. Many eyewitnesses reports claimed that there were gallons of blood at the bottom of the cart. The ride was soon removed permanently, thus becoming the death of the park. Without the star power of the Big Dipper on their side, they were forced to close their doors in 1974, just 2 years after the incident.
Playland, New York. 1928 marked the sounding of Playland and has been going on ever since, soon to be celebrating its 90th birthday as of the writing of this. However, a park as old as this is bound to have skeletons buried deep within their closet. The earliest death on record followed shortly after the park's opening day, 1928, when a young man, aged only 19 years old, was riding the Whip. Nowadays, the Whip is probably the least extreme roller coaster to ever grace an amusement park. However, the straps on this ride were not strapped on correctly, and the boy was knocked from the ride and then was crushed beneath the wheels of the other riders. Another death did not occur on these park grounds for another 60 years when an 8-year-old girl was chewing gum while on the famous Dragon Coaster. She was chewing gum when the ride started to go downhill at a fast pace. Far too fast for her to handle, the gum got lodged in her throat. Over the duration of the grueling ride, the gum choked her. By the time the ride had finished, she was pronounced dead in her seat. The coaster was soon evacuated after, and remained closed for a while out of respect, but has since been up and running. However, things really start to pick up death-wise after the 2000s, most notably on the Mine Scrambler. The Mine Scrambler was enclosed within a tent, mixing a standard tilt-a-whirl ride, but mixed light snow in as well. It grew rather popular, leading to many children to flock towards it. 2004, the problem started when a little girl of 7 years old boarded, due to the employees not checking her safety restraints, and them not being tight enough, led her to wiggle free. Halfway through the ride, she stood up to wave at another student, and was thrown from the ride, dying upon impact of another cart. 3 years later, another death happened on, you guessed it, the Mine Scrambler, when an employee 21 years of age was helping some of the younger riders out of their carts. That's when the ride suddenly started again, and she was violently struck with multiple carts, dying of blunt force trauma. A large-scale investigation was put into place, which ended with the State Labor Department finding that a vast majority of the park's employees were severely undertrained and not qualified to run a park. Something the park skipped out on to, you guessed it, save money. Due to pressure, Playland dismantled the ride, thus ensuring it would never run again. The most famous accident to ever happen upon park grounds was the death at the Ye Olde Mill. The child's name has never been made public, and we won't go into the name itself here as we wish to pay respect to the family. But nonetheless, here we go.
Ride at your own risk. Now, while Ride Playland has been a place for lots of family fun, in recent years, it's also been the scene of many tragedies. 3 people died on rides at Playland over a 3-year stretch. In 2 of those cases, they've resulted in lawsuits against the park's owner, none other than Westchester County. Our Regina Orsani, she found out why one of those lawsuits was settled so quickly and uncovered some stunning details about the death of a child that had never been made public before now.
1 year after the death at the Mine Scrambler, another 7-year-old, this time being a young boy, boarded the ride alone. The ride was a standard boat trip through a linear path guided by animatronic miners that crept way past the uncanny valley. No one knows exactly how this happened, but by the time the ride had finished, the boy had vanished from his boat. It was first thought to be a missing child case. The ride was evacuated, and they started checking with a lot of hope. At first they believed he was hiding behind one of the many creepy animatronics, but unfortunately they found him elsewhere. The boy was found under the water, beneath the boat's tracks, face down. Thus, the blame game began. Some blaming the employees for not paying attention, some blaming the park for having water that was far too violent for a gentle boat ride that was able to jolt it back and forth far enough to knock the boy out. The family of the child sued, and on March 24, 2009, the family was awarded $1.25 million in grief and damages. Since then, Playland has created a scholarship in the child's name to be awarded to any employee who exhibits, and I quote here, excellency in safety and customer service. What a crock of shit.
Disney World / Land. You can have an entire video on just accidents at Walt Disney parks. In fact, many people have. There are so many accidents that it has been estimated that every year, Disney receives over 100 lawsuits about incidents that happen within the park. So consider these just small leaflets in a long history of bad luck. We suggest that you look into these, as the majority of them are quite interesting to research. We're serious. So many strange and messed up stuff has happened within the hallowed grounds of Disney, including an incident in 2013, when a worker made explosives out of dry ice and placed them in the trash cans. While there damaged the property, fortunately, no guests were injured. But a large-scale investigation was put into place, and the employee was placed in prison and is now required by law to avoid Disney parks. Another incident, this time in 1987, involved a gang war right outside the park, in which 2 small groups of people were found shooting at one another, ultimately leading to a single causality, in which a 15-year-old gang member was caught point blank with a bullet to the skull. Possibly the most famous death to ever happen on Disney grounds was the death of young Debbie Stone. The date was June 28, 1974. Disney had recently put in a ride entitled America Sings, a ride led by animatronic anthropomorphic animals that sung songs throughout America's history. The ride was rather popular, but would eternally be tainted by the untimely passing of little Debbie. Debbie had been working at Disney for a short while, and she wasn't used to the way the ride was structured. You see, the ride had 6 stages, but took place within one room. The singular room would lay within the center and spin slowly so that the ride could progress seamlessly and the customers wouldn't even have to get up and out of their seats. A novel concept, but sadly for Debbie, she was in the wrong place at the wrong time. The host was supposed to stand at the right of the stage at any given period, but due to Debbie not being trained properly, she was standing to the left. She fell back out of the room as it was switching stages, and poor Debbie was slowly crushed between the walls. When what was left of her body was found, the ride was closed for 2 days. When it was reopened, the stage in which she was crushed was closed for 2 entire months, before opening in its entirety after many safety measures were taken, including sensors that detected if something had left the room during the ride, thus stopping them immediately. Breakaway walls were also added in case the sensors wind up being bust. America Sings was closed in 1988, yet the memory of Debbie lives on. Many patrons have claimed to even see her spirit when the ride stood still, warning people to mind the rules and watch out. On December 24, 1998, while riding upon the Disney sailing ship Columbia ride, Lewin Dawson was struck with a large metal cleat that had shaken loose and struck him in the skull. He was pronounced brain dead 2 days later, thus starting a large investigation. It was found that Disney had replaced the original rope that held the cleat in place with a nylon elastic one as a way of saving cost. And to make matters worse, the employee was insufficiently trained on how to pilot the ride, thus leading to more violations. It is speculated that Lewin could have survived if medical attention was provided in time. However, at the time, Disney wouldn't allow any medical professions on the park grounds, as to not fry guests. All of this wound up culminating into a $12,500 fine from the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, alongside a $25 million lawsuit from the family. Since then, Disney has added more medical staff. There is so much more we could go into, but there's just far too much to go off of, and it may be better suited for a separate video.
And finally, number 1, Action Park. Possibly one of the most famous and dangerous theme parks of all time, not having just one deadly ride, but their entire park being composed of nothing but safety hazards and warnings. Opening its doors on May 26, 1978, it has been opened and closed down an unprecedented 3 times over almost 4 decades. The park has had a total of 6 people killed by the park's lax regulations, poorly constructed attractions, and staff that had little to no training in safety precautions. There has been a countless number of injuries ranging from gashes to knocked out teeth to broken bones and permanent disfigurement. And it all started at the beginning. Action Park was started as a merger between 3 parks: a ski resort, a water park, and a raceway. It was one of the very first water parks in America, making it rather influential. However, due to the scarcity of water parks at the time, not many people knew how to, well, maintain one. Many slides were built off of concept alone and with minimal or even no safety testing. It's decisions like this that led to the infamous Cannonball Loop, which we'll go over in a second, but you guys may recognize this from many other clickbaity top list thumbnails as the "can't believe it really exists." And let me tell you, it does. One of the park's most dangerous rides was the Alpine Slide, a tunnel built entirely out of concrete and fiberglass. Yes, you heard that right, fiberglass, and was directly below the ski jumps. The riders were given metal slides to ride down on, along with a stick attached to the back that would control how fast you could go down. Though all speeds were considered dangerous, the fastest of which was frequently referred to as death awaits. Within the 18 years of the slide's activity, there were hundreds of fractures, concussions, broken limbs, including 1 broken neck, as well as 1 death. In 1980, a 19-year-old park employee was testing out the ride when they encountered a turn. They went scaling over the slide at full speed into a large pile of rocks, cracking their head open and dying. Despite the fact that this ride made up over 40% of the injuries at the park, they continued to insist that it was the safest ride on park grounds. And that even, and I quote, a 90-year-old grandmother could ride it without a problem. The park's most famous ride is the previously mentioned looping water slide, which, as its name implies, is a regular water slide with an abrupt 360-degree loop at the end. Many rumors begun to surface as the ride was originally being tested with dummies, but these dummies would leave without limbs and sometimes completely decapitated. Even more rumors begun to surface about having the park employees test a ride, as the park owner would come by and offer anyone $20 to give it a go around, at $20 each time they would make it out. These rumors turned out to be completely true, as they were confirmed by the ride's designer's daughter, who added that whenever a dummy would leave disfigured, they wouldn't actually fix the ride. They would just send more dummies until one would leave in the acceptable condition, and then use that statistic as what they presented to the government. Once the ride was open to the public, people would report burns as the ride would run out of water halfway down the slide, leaving them skidding across plastic that was superheated in the sun at top speed. People would also report getting concussions and getting stuck at the top of the loop, which eventually led the park installing a small door at the top of the loop so that patrons who were stuck could easily leave the slide altogether. Surprisingly, there was no deaths on this ride, but it would shut down shortly after being installed, and it would soon go down as one of the most infamous rides of all time. The attraction that took the most lives was the park's very own wave pool. Normally, wave pools are the safest rides at water parks, as they are small pools, built more for children, that would generate small waves that would gently push the crowds around. Action Park didn't quite get this memo. The park would sometimes have waves over 40 inches in length, dragging some patrons down. People would crowd the ladders and try to get up, but due to there being so few ladders available and only so many people that can get out, this would cause fights over who could leave first. The first death happened to a 15-year-old boy in 1982 when the tide came in a bit too strong and pulled him to the bottom. The next in 1984, when a 20-year-old suffered a similar fate, and yet another 18-year-old who wound up getting caught in a particularly strong current in 1987. Employees would often refer to these areas as the grave pool. 3 of the 6 deaths happened here, and due to severely limited amounts of ill-experienced lifeguards, injuries were a very common sight, which brings me to the park's employees. A large majority of the employees were teenagers and were given little to no training, yet they were expected to be lifeguards, ride operators, and even the occasional paramedic, or, at one point in time, even bartenders of the park's many beer dispensaries. There were frequent alcohol sales. At most of the ride stops, they had booths that could sell beer to whoever asked for it, oftentimes to minors, as they didn't dare check ID, cause hey, $10 is good no matter how old you are. Sometimes the employees would get drunk themselves. Now, we got a park full of drunk and inexperienced teenagers running poorly designed rides, and that is a math equation for disaster. Another one of the park's deaths happened upon the Tarzan swing, a ride that was simply a rope where a customer would hang on to said rope and jump into a large spring-fed pool. There were many reports of people getting burns from the rope, and sometimes people went missing altogether. In 1984, a man was riding the rope swing when they dropped into the water, and he was met with a heart attack. You see, the water was too cold, gradually differing from the warm weather that was out. This juxtaposition between hot and cold wound up being too much of a shock for the man, killing him instantly. Another death happened within the park's famous kayak rides, in which a man was thrown out of his boat. While trying to get back in, his foot touched an exposed grate that was in direct contact with some live wiring, electrocuting the man to death. A large-scale investigation was put into place to find a root cause of death, as Action Park pleaded it was simply not their fault. When the exposed wiring was found, they claimed it to be just a nick, but the investigators said otherwise, as 8 inches of this wire was exposed. It wasn't a matter of if an accident would happen, it was a matter of when. One of the park's last creative endeavors before closing its doors is the opening of a skate park section, which they built ramps out of concrete and metal. However, the sides of the ramps are far too narrow, knocking many riders off their boats and making them skid across the concrete, sometimes into other skaters. To avoid lawsuits, they quickly shut down the area and covered the ramps up with dirt, pretending that they didn't even exist. Despite all of these casualties and injuries, the park remained popular for many years following its first closing in 1998, before opening again 2 years later as Mountain Creek Water Park. Most of the dangerous rides were almost removed from it, before closing again in 2013. The park reopened again in 2014 under the original name of Action Park, but didn't even last a year before its closure. There has been talk, however, of reviving it yet again. The park, however, was not closed due to being too unsafe, but rather because of tax evasion and fraud, which eventually led to the government shutting it down for them. During the park's peak years of existing, there were as many as 9 to 20 ambulance calls a day, which the park refuted, but in order to avoid further lawsuits from the hospitals and the local governments, they simply bought the hospital a whole new line of ambulances as a way of saying, we're sorry, but we're gonna keep hurting people. Here you go, have fun. There was also a sort of water bumper cart ride that would cause people to break their limbs, as the ride itself was far too small for most of the patrons who would ride it, so their legs dangled off the sides of the boat, and when they crunched into one another, it led to many more fractures and injuries. Action Park is actually a very fondly remembered park, despite it being this most dangerous, hazardous place. Many people remember this park for being a place that they survived. It was, yes, I rode that concrete slide and did not break my neck. One of the last tidbits I'll leave you with before closing out my video is this. Most of the people who went to this park were Latino, as the park was built in a mostly Latino populated area. Despite this, none of the teenagers could speak Spanish, and none of the safety warnings or instructions were ever explained in Spanish, which caused even more safety hazards and dangers for those who decided to attend the infamous Action Park. Yo, you like videos like this? Well, consider donating to me on Patreon so that I can support my crippling McDonald's addiction so I don't starve while editing videos like this for you. However, if you are unable to do that, I can tell you 2 more ways you can support the channel. Number 1, subscribe, click the notification bell, comment. Anything helps get this video out, which in turn gives me more ad revenue. The second thing you can do is by joining me on my social media and my team. I'm currently assembling writers, editors, and even voice actors to join the TCR Narrations team. So if you think you can do it, consider hitting me up on Twitter or Discord. And don't forget to join the fan community Discord, where you get plenty of perks like being able to talk to me and calling me mean names. With that being said, sit back, relax, and wait for the next video, which should be out soon. I'm your host TCR, and hopefully I don't kill myself. See ya.